Welcome to Colorado, everybody. Hope you're able to enjoy a little bit of our beautiful state while you're here. And during these challenging times, don't give up on joy. Everyone here is feeling the stress, the trauma, and pain that you personally, your clients, and the rule of law all under attack. And we need to get through this together, which means support one another, take times for yourselves, take time for your family. In Colorado, Juneteenth is a state holiday to take time for freedom and for the promises that this nation holds dear. And there's no place I'd rather be than with you all to reflect on how relevant this is to our moment. When you think back on our nation's Reconstruction amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments, they are part of an American commitment to cash a promissory note, as Dr. King put it, that was in the Declaration of Independence, a promissory note of freedom and equality for all. And those amendments are seeking to advance that promise, but as we know well, they only at best imperfectly advance that work. What they do represent, however, is part of this great American story with the motto of E pluribus unum. Out of many, we are one. That motto is part of what is well known to this group. We are a nation of immigrants. Unless your ancestors are indigenous, then you can trace your family story. And at the best part of our history, like my family story, it's a ladder of opportunity and not one where we pull up the ladder after one generation comes here. I want to talk a little bit about our promise of being an inclusive and pluralistic republic. I want to start, however, with my family story. As was mentioned, my mom and my grandparents survived the Holocaust. My mom is currently in Leipzig, Germany, 80 years after she was born in the Buchenwald concentration camp. My grandmother's story of survival as a pregnant woman in a concentration camp is a miracle. The fact that I am here is a miracle. The fact that the U.S. Army liberated my grandmother and my mom 5 days after my mom was born is a miracle. After liberation, my family had one goal, like so many around the world. The goal was to come to the United States of America, a nation they believed promised freedom and opportunity for everyone, no matter who you are. And there was a group known as HIAS, or the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, that advocates for immigrants and helped my family get here. My family, like people today and throughout our nation's history, were stateless or refugees and were welcomed by the United States of America. And the fact that the United States could welcome my family, who didn't speak the language, didn't have any money, didn't have any marketable skills, is a testament to what it says on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses seeking to breathe free. In one generation, my family story moves from my mom being born in that concentration camp, a stateless refugee, to me standing here as a lawyer, having worked for Justice Byron White and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court, having served President Barack Obama in the White House, serving as Colorado's Attorney General, all in one generation. That's what America's about. In this moment, we need to hold on to that vision of America, a vision where we don't label people an other. We don't exclude people and say, oh, you're not, quote unquote, a real American. America is a land that includes everyone. And we, the people, means everyone. And this is an important distinction because our nation's spirit of inclusion is unlike that of most nations that have existed in human history. We didn't adopt a national religion. Instead, we committed to protect religious liberty. And as our nation was being founded, those who were refugees, those who were fleeing persecution because they weren't the quote unquote right religion in their country, they came to America because of what we promised, freedom and opportunity for all. George Washington captured this spirit in a famous letter he wrote to a Rhode Island synagogue that embraced religious tolerance, that embraced inclusion. And yes, e pluribus unum, here's what he said. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it, on all occasions, their effectual support. And then he quotes from the book of Micah. This becomes famous in the musical Hamilton. And he wished for the Jewish community to continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit safely under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. May the Father of all mercy scatter light and not darkness in our paths, and make us in all our vocations useful here, and his own due time and way everlastingly happy. In America, that's what we wish for everyone, whatever your religion, wherever you came from, whatever you look like, whoever you love, you are an American. You are part of this promise of e pluribus unum. As we think about this vision of America, there is no other. There is only us. That's what e pluribus unum means. Out of many, we are one. And in my own religious tradition, that's what we're taught. We're taught not to treat anybody as an other. During the holiday of Passover, for example, it celebrates the Exodus, where the Jews were slaves in Egypt, and liberation, an appropriate concept for Juneteenth. There's a festive meal. It's called the Seder, and one of the traditions is to mourn the Egyptians who died while liberation was happening. Because the idea is that every single person is a child of God. And we're taught, don't forget the stranger, because we were once strangers in a strange land. Everyone in America, other than those who are indigenous, has an immigrant story. We all need to remember that story and remember that others are coming with their stories and they're like us. I believe deeply in that, and we are at a time of rising hate, a time when the increasing likelihood to treat someone as an other because they are transgender, because of the color of their skin, because of their religion, because they're an immigrant, we're seeing that on the rise. We're seeing rising intolerance, rising hate, and even violence from extremists who are seeking to weaponize this idea about who's a real American and who's an immigrant. When a synagogue was attacked in Pittsburgh, it was known as the Tree of Life Synagogue, the person who did the attack was motivated by an animus against immigrants. And the fact that HIAS, the group that brought my family here, was working with that synagogue, was cited by the attacker as part of his motivation. The Tree of Life actually has meaning in my religious tradition because that's what we call the 5 books of Moses, a tree of life for those who hold fast to it. And what we have to hold fast to right now is the core spirit of our nation that says in America, hate has no sanction. Bigotry has no sanction. And we cannot give in to this rising tide of demonization, of divisiveness, and hate. And that means when we see symbols like the Nazi flag, the Confederate flag, the Ku Klux Klan, it's not harmless. And language like we're taking our country back by any means necessary, or protecting America for the real America, is not harmless. That is coded language that is being used today to justify hate and even violence. Now, Colorado has had our share of departures from our American ideal. The Sand Creek Massacre is a notable one. At the same time, we have worked hard to advance this ideal of equal and fair treatment for all. In the building I work, it is known as the Ralph Carr Building. Ralph Carr was governor of Colorado in World War II when he concluded that the internment of Japanese Americans violated equal protection of the laws. For that stand of principle, and his biography, which is worth reading, is known as The Principled Politician, he lost his next election. But he took a stand for equality, for treating everyone fairly. He believed in the Constitution. He believed in e pluribus unum, and he believed the U.S. Supreme Court decision, the Korematsu case, stood as a negative precedent, that the Supreme Court's condoning of this internment of Japanese Americans was wrong and unconstitutional, and history has proved Ralph Carr correct. I want to talk a little bit about immigration law as we now find it. And although this is an area of uniquely federal authority, state officials are finding ourselves dealing with more than a few questions around immigration law. The first point I want to note, which is a good starting place on Juneteenth, is the Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision represents the opposite of Juneteenth. It's a decision that says Black Americans have no rights under our Constitution and are merely property. Like Ralph Carr with Korematsu, Abraham Lincoln called that decision out as wrong and a negative precedent. And in both cases, history has proved Ralph Carr and Abraham Lincoln correct, because the 14th Amendment overrode the Dred Scott decision. I can read to you Section 1, which says, anyone born in the United States, whatever the color of your skin, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is a citizen. The Supreme Court has confirmed this clause applies to the children of non-citizens, regardless of whether in the U.S. the parent had any form of recognized status. Now, in January of 2025, on the first day of this administration, as was referred to, the spirit of demonization and the fact of lawlessness was on display in the Oval Office as President Trump attempted to subvert the U.S. Constitution with a stroke of a pen, saying that he was ending the 14th Amendment's promise of birthright citizenship. This order, if it were allowed to go into effect, would apply broadly for lots of categories of children, whether children of people with an H-1B visa, for example, or dreamers, or those with no legal authorization or documentation. Colorado and a range of other states took the administration to court, and in what is a parallel case to ours, a judge appointed by Ronald Reagan had the following to say: this action was the most unconstitutional thing he'd seen in 40 years on the bench. And he asked a question that I find myself asking again and again and again. When these executive orders are happening, where are the lawyers? Did anyone ask, is this legal? Because a number of these actions, including deprivations of due process of law, are manifestly illegal. When the Supreme Court heard arguments on this birthright citizenship case, it's notable that there wasn't a lot of effort to defend the administration's actions on the merits. Instead, the question is, would you need every single state to bring a case Or could you get a so-called nationwide or universal injunction? Because on the theory of the Trump administration, it would not be enough for Colorado to win a case, say in the 10th Circuit, because other 10th Circuit states like Utah might not have brought a case. Someone born in Utah would not have birthright citizenship. They'd have to bring their own case. But what if they moved to Colorado? Or what if someone born in Colorado moved to Utah? I believe in this case, we deserve, and it is sensible to have a universal injunction. We will see how the Supreme Court rules. Then there's the matter of cutting off funding to pressure states to advance this administration's immigration enforcement agenda, and even threats to prosecute public officials. In Colorado, this is obviously a real threat. We are one of the states now facing a lawsuit from this administration. And my response is quite clear. We will defend the rule of law. We will not be intimidated. The rule of law and our Constitution makes very plain the federal government cannot commandeer state law enforcement and force them to engage in immigration enforcement, which is a federal activity. In Colorado, we believe our law enforcement needs to focus on law enforcement and public safety and not be commandeered to do immigration enforcement. And we've been down this road before in the first Trump administration. They withheld public safety funding under a program known as the Burn Jag program. And they said they were going to not give us this funding because we weren't allowing this commandeering scheme to take effect. We went to court and we won, and we got the grant funding. The range of indiscriminate intimidation and scare tactics that are now playing out, to me, is an affront to what a lawful, sensible, and humane immigration system would look like. I've met with other immigration advocates, immigration lawyers like yourself, and have talked about this principle of the rule of law and due process of law. Everyone here deserves fair process and the rule of law. By the way, I carry around a copy of the Constitution from my office. And for those who don't know whether, say, the 14th Amendment applies to everyone, you might just look at the text of it, which is quite clear. It says, and I'm going to read the clause before because it makes this crystal clear. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens. Privileges and immunities apply to citizens. The next line says, nor shall any state deprive any person means any person, of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And then, just if you were wondering, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. In Yickwo v. Hopkins, it doesn't matter if the individual is a citizen, because the individual is a person and entitled to equal protection of the laws. And whether it's Mr. Albrego Garcia or others, everyone is entitled to due process of law in the United States of America. I believe that we will be able to hold the line on this front, but I also am deeply pained that so many who are living their lives in the way that they have known are finding themselves upended by the fear, can I go to work? Can I go to school? Can I go to the hospital? Can I testify in a case? Because I don't know if I might be grabbed by ICE agents. The orderly administration of the laws would have us focus instead on people who have gone through the whole process, who have been given due process and been judged deportable, and only then be subject to deportation. I want to tell another story which is on this point, and it came to my office and breaks my heart. It's about someone, I'm going to call him Jack so I don't reveal his name. He's a police officer in Colorado. He's now subject to being targeted by the Department of Homeland Security. He and his wife, they came here legally. They made Colorado their home. He applied for permanent resident status. He completed the paperwork and he followed up regularly, but he's been waiting 2.5 years for his application to be processed. Meanwhile, he's living his life following the procedures and maintaining his status, and now is informed that the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement views him as an illegal alien. He and his family, including 2 kids who were born in the United States and are American citizens, are now living with the fear that I know you all know well. This treatment of Jack is cruel, it is wrong, and it's not how a just nation should be behaving. I want to talk a little bit more about this challenge of how we follow due process of law and give you what I think is at least a silver lining or a note of optimism. The Supreme Court has already confronted this issue and in a 7-2 vote refused to allow the Trump administration to invoke the Alien Enemies Act in an end run around due process. I see this as a hopeful sign that at the end of the day, we will defend and we will prevail in defending due process of law. I've been talking a bit about the 14th Amendment, but I want to touch on the First Amendment too, because in multiple actions, whether it's targeting law firms, universities, foreign students who are here, we are seeing to a brazen degree the punishment of protected speech. Like due process of law, free speech is a foundation of our republic and must be defended, regardless of whether or not you agree with the speech. It is easy to defend the right to free speech when you agree with someone saying. It is critical that we defend free speech when it's something that others might find offensive. And as Justice Brandeis famously once said, the cure for speech that you find offensive and problematic and wrong is more speech, not penalizing the speaker. I want to close with some thoughts on this challenging moment, how we find our way through and how we defend the ideals of e pluribus unum. In Colorado, I've seen what it means to defend this ideal. We had a devastating shooting on the LGBTQ community in Colorado Springs at a nightclub known as Club Q. And the response to that shooting was that an attack on any of us, because of who we are, must be treated as an attack on all of us. I saw a similar spirit after the attack on Jews in Boulder on June 1st. We need, at this moment, to bear witness to the growing hate in our society and respond by doing all we can, building bonds of humanity. When you know people as people, like the individual Jack I mentioned, it's very hard to demonize them as an other. By contrast, if we fail to build those bonds, if we give in to divisiveness and demonization, then we are giving oxygen to rising hate and division. We all instead can lean in how we might repair our world where too many feel isolated, lonely, and angry, and are open to these bigoted appeals. The premise of e pluribus unum is that everyone is worth listening to. Consider what President Lincoln had to say in his second inaugural address. with malice towards none, with charity towards all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up these nations' wounds, and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. We will get through this time. We will continue to hold fast to the rule of law, to e pluribus unum. And on the other side, as we work towards an inclusive republic, that means that we are recognizing the value of immigrants. We are building relationships based on curiosity and empathy, not judgment. And we are working to recognize that all of us need all of us. Our universities are stronger because we have immigrants here. Our research laboratories depend on people coming here to work and study. And we have so many companies and successful entrepreneurs like my family who wanted to come here for freedom opportunity. We can't forget that. I believe at some point, a little bit like Winston Churchill once said, the Americans will do the right thing after they've tried the alternatives. We will get to a rational immigration reform proposal that will become law. We won't deport dreamers and others who've lived here peaceably and part of our community and economy. Unfortunately, to get there, we're going to have to get past our current dysfunction in Congress, and we're going to have to find a way to act based on principle and logic, not based on fear and emotion. I believe we will get there, and I believe that our nation depends on that. I want to thank you all for your work to make our immigration system work as it should, humanely, sensibly, and under the rule of law. I recognize, like Jack and for so many, we are living at a time of fear and hardship for immigrants and immigrant communities, people who only want to find a path for themselves and their families so they can contribute. Together, we can live up to the examples of Abraham Lincoln and Ralph Carr, defend our freedoms, and recognize our nation's commitment to e pluribus unum is worth fighting for. Thank you all. Happy Juneteenth.